Hey there, welcome to the first episode of Weekend Sprint. In this episode we'll set the Flask application, build the Docker image and push it to the private container registry in Azure. So let's get started. First let's set the virtual environment for our Python application. Let's activate the virtual environment. Let's create a couple of files. So app.py is going to be our application. Requirements is going to be a set of dependencies for the application. Let's bootstrap Flask and Gunicorn. And let's install dependencies using pip tool from the package management. So the next step, I will create an application itself. So it's going to be a basic Flask application. We also will use socket package. So that socket package will help us to fetch the hostname or FQDN of the running system, for example, of the Docker container or the actual host. So let's set the route, let's set the default method that will return hello world message as well as some system information via sockets. Let's test our application by typing +CRAN. And let's check in web. So the application should be exposed to port 5000 on localhost, and it works. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. And let's create a configuration file for the Gunicorn that will be used by default by the Gunicorn web server gateway interface. So we're going to set, according to the best practice, we'll use the amount of CPU multiplied by 2 plus 1. That's going to give us the number of workers. And then we're going to define the default binaries address and the port number. And let's test the Gunicorn as well. It works. It's the same port, so it works. So our next step is to create a Dockerfile. For that, we will create a Dockerfile, and then we define the Dockerfile with the base image Python version 3.10. We're going to use a slim version, so we're going to keep the image as small as possible, and then we're going to do a bunch of other things. We set the work directory, we copy the content of our application to the work directory. Specifically, we want to use app.py, so we also want to copy the requirements file. So let's install the same inside the image. So we use the pip tool for installation of the dependencies, and then we also want to copy the default configuration for the Gunicorn. And then we want to execute by passing the Gunicorn with some parameters. So we call the app, and then we call the app method within the model. So let's build the image. The image has been built successfully. Let's run the application from the container, and let's expose the port 80 and let's map it to the container port 5000. It works as well, so we see that there is a hostname of the container. So the next step, we will use a Bicep template. So Bicep is the DSL or domain specific language, which was invented by Azure on top of IRM. So we're going to define the main Bicep file, and we're going to keep it very simple. So what we want to do is we want to define, we want to build a Azure Container Registry. So that's the resource that we will use to keep our Docker image. In short, ACR or Azure Container Registry is designed to store the container images as well as the Helm charts. You can also store the template specs like Bicep or IRM template in that resource, and then you can deploy them by referring to this registry. So The next step is to create a resource group in Azure. So my Azure command line interface is configured and logged into Azure. So I also have a subscription in it. So I've created a resource group, and my next stop is to check what if I deploy the template that I just defined for the Azure Container Registry by passing the ACR name as a parameter to the templates, and also the resource group with the flag -g. So what if is happy? There is no syntax error because we also use the extension for Visual Studio Code that is helping us with linting, basically highlighting the syntax problems. So we're going to validate the template as well against the Azure policies and some other constraints that we might have. For example, the name of the ACR should be unique across the whole Azure infrastructure. So it works as well. And then the final step is to create a resource as well by passing the create method to the deployment command. It works. So the resource has been successfully created. Let's list the list of the ACR. Indeed, we do have a new ACR called Dockerized. Let's try to use our user principal to log into this container registry. It works. Let's check whether we have everything stored in the configuration file for Docker. Yes, it does have a reference to my keychain. Yeah, all works perfectly. So the next stop is to try push an image. So the next stop is to tag the application, the Dockerized application with the new tag referring to the container registry in Azure, and also push this to this container registry. We've pushed it successfully. So let's see if we have any images available locally, cached locally. So we don't have any. Let's run the application by referring to the ACR directly. So for that we run the docker run. And it works. So let's test the application in the browser. So it returns different FQDN. So it works. Thanks for watching. Join me in the next episode.